Angela Rayner. Now, I've met her. I quite liked her. She's sharp-witted with a wicked sense of humour. But, Angela, surely you can see how this looks. Basically, our Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary admitted on Friday night, that she removed her name from the deeds of her family home in Manchester before then purchasing a seaside flat 250 miles away in Brighton for just under £800,000. Now, by doing that, she saved £40,000 in stamp duty. At the same time, she insisted that her old house in Greater Manchester remained her main residence. And in doing this, she avoided paying £2,000 in council tax on a third property, which is a Grace and Favour flat in central London. She's obviously taken some great advice to avoid paying the top whack of tax. Oh, wait, she's the Housing Secretary. I get it, Angela. We'd all do the same, and you haven't broken any laws. But just like Freebiegate, which for most was within the rules, the optics are very, very bad, especially after you complained that there weren't enough houses.
Are you content that more than 5 out of 7 new homes will go to immigrants?
Well, that's not the truth, and that's not the
That's
case.
what will happen.
Well, that's not the reality, because we've,
Well, where
in
the
particular, in social
2.5 million immigrants that are in Rachel Reeves' budget figures going to turn up? Where are they going to live?
Well, there's plenty of housing in the UK, but the houses, especially social
hang on. You can't, on the one hand, say we've got to build this 1.5 million houses and then say there's plenty of housing already.
There is plenty of housing, Trevor, already, but there's not enough for the people that desperately need it. So
well, are there enough houses or not? I think what she's alluding to is that there are too many people with more than one house, like her. The person who pledged to build 1.5 million new homes. Imagine if we all had 3 of those homes at our disposal. The Tory party have referred Angela to Sir Laurie Magnus, the Prime Minister's independent advisor on ministers' interests, saying her behaviour had been unethical. They accused her of hypocritical tax avoidance by a minister who supports higher taxes on family homes, high-value homes and second homes. I'm fed up of this working-class girl done good justification by many in the media to overlook this. Yes, you've done very well for yourself, Angela, but so what? I'm a capitalist through and through, and like Nigel, I'm happy for you that you can afford 3 homes. But how do you square this with your socialist outlook, spouting out about housing shortages when you effectively have 3 and have used all the clever moves to avoid tax?
Only one rule with this cabinet, and that is that there's one rule for them and one rule for all of us. Like the Foreign Secretary, cancelling leave for our troops and then trooping off to the beach. One rule for them, another rule for us.
Yes, do as I say, not as I do. In my view, you're a hypocrite, Angela. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is Angela Rayner a hypocrite after she avoided £40,000 worth in stamp duty, despite previously calling for tax rises and blasting the Tories on similar issues? So I'm asking, is she a hypocrite? Then for the second Great British Debate of this hour, I'm asking, is Rachel Reeves out of her depth after ASDA's chairman has urged the Chancellor to stop taxing everything in some sort of way, shape or form? I'm asking, is Reeves out of her depth? That is coming up as ever. Send me your thoughts, post your comments, gbnews.com/your say. Right, well, I'm joined now by former editor of The Labellist, Peter Edwards, who I'm sure no doubt will tell me I'm totally wrong. Peter.
Well, I just try and rely on facts. You know, Angela Rayner's team briefed out that she paid all the tax that was owed. You know, she got divorced and that was very sad. So her primary home wasn't in Stockport. Like a lot of MPs, they rent in their constituency for various reasons. No one has actually suggested that she's broken the law. And it's only really the Daily Telegraph getting particularly exercised about this. If she's acted within the rules, her team said she paid the tax owed. What is the issue?
Well, the issue is that she's keeping the residence in Manchester as her main residence. So why is that her main? So she's taken her name off the deeds, but kept it as a main residence. But by doing that, she's managed to avoid £40,000 of stamp duty on the new home that she's just purchased. Now that might be within the rules, but for somebody who, is talking about morality and all those things, it does look like she's sort of working out how to avoid paying the extra amount, but also keeping herself in with her main residence, which she no longer lives at. She doesn't live there. That's what everyone says. People around there don't see her there. So how is that her main residence?
Well, I don't buy this thing about people don't see her around there. She's been an
MP
MP
they said that.
for over a decade. She has constituency surgeries there. And that's a good thing about the political system. Unlike America, you retain a link.
Yes, but if she's putting that down as her main residence, which obviously but she's no longer on the deeds, and by doing that she's able to avoid £40,000 worth of stamp duty, how does that work? It sounds to me like she's worked out.
Imagine she'd done the opposite. Imagine Stockport was not her main residence. Then the Daily Telegraph would be even more exercised about that. And it's completely right that politicians face scrutiny. There's nothing wrong with that. But dare I say, it's happening a lot with Angela Rayner. There was a quote-unquote scandal over capital gains tax last year, but she'd also acted within the rules then. There was an apparent scandal over Beergate and COVID rules, but she'd also acted within the rules then as well. So a lot of the quote-unquote scandals run by the Daily Telegraph really end up coming to nothing.
Well, what about, so John Prescott, for example, Admiralty House, he was forced to apologise and pay the council tax to that, because obviously by doing what she's done now, that means that she can avoid council tax for her Grace and Favour property, and that was a Grace and Favour property for him. Michael Gove, the same thing. So it's not a good look, is it?
Angela Rayner's team briefed out that she paid all the tax that was owed. So you can use words like hypocrite, but what has she actually done wrong in your eyes?
OK, so I'll try again. The property that she's put in trust for her kids, she has labelled as her main residence, even though it isn't, because, so by doing that, just before she buys an £800,000 house, it means that with her name not on the deed, she no longer has to pay the higher rate of stamp duty on the second property. Do you understand? So therefore, what I could do is so that means that's literally, that's a great, I wish I'd known that, because what I'll do now is, if I'm allowed to, is my property, the flat in London that is my property, I could put it down as something for my kids and maybe call it the main residence, but take my name off the deeds, and then if I buy another house, I won't have to, I can buy another house without paying the higher level of stamp duty. I mean, I'm not sure that I'll get that totally right, but it's opened the floodgates, really, for people looking at that going, hold on a minute. That's a way of avoiding stamp duty, the full rate.
No, it hasn't. First of all, you're fulminating, but she doesn't own a home in Stockport. She got divorced, and it sounds like they rounded off most of the formalities, and she's acted within law. And secondly,
but she's put it as her main residence.
I mean, that's just a nonsense, really.
No, but she's put it as her main residence. But just put it as her main residence.
Okay.
So after giving away the deeds...
So why are you angry about that?
Well, I'm not angry about it. I'm just saying that having labelled it as her main residence and put the deeds to her kids and her ex-husband, fair enough, but she's labelling it still as her main residence, and now, just before she buys something in another place, she is now avoiding £40,000 in terms of stamp duty. Now, I'm not saying that I wouldn't do the same thing, but the bottom line is she is also the housing secretary who has gone on about how there aren't enough houses, and then they weren't, or whatever she was going on about there. I'm not sure even she knew. But she's gone on about that, and yet now, effectively, she has 3 homes that she could potentially utilise. And plus, I don't think she's paying council tax on the Grace and Favour property either.
Well, she hasn't got 3 homes that she owns, and that's why we've got to be clear about language.
But she's effectively got use of. That's why I didn't say owned. I said she's effectively got use of.
But that's something very different, because of the various allegations, some relate to things like stamp duty, which are about ownership. So if you're residing or spending a time in another property, that's completely irrelevant. And I think this is where the Daily Telegraph souffle begins to collapse, because there's a suggestion that she's avoided tax somehow by doing something improperly. She's followed the rules.
They haven't.
She rents a home.
They haven't, though. Have you read the article? They haven't said that she's done anything illegal. It's more the look, how it how it comes across. She is the housing secretary, okay? The housing secretary who is using the law and the rules in such a way to avoid paying the full amount. That's what I see. It's all within the rules. It's like freebie gate. A lot of the things were in the rules, even though the clothing that she got was called something different, but it doesn't matter. She then updated the definition of what the money or the clothes that she got was for, so that was fine. It was within the rules, but it wasn't a good look. That's the point we're making. It's a very bad look. Do you not think so? Do you think it looks fine to you?
I think taking a lot of free gifts is really unwise, and I think Labour had quite a chastening experience over that. But on property, a lot of which is not owned, when Labour in government, senior cabinet ministers had more than one property. When the Tories, when the Lib Dems were in government, they also used grace and favour flats. That is how the system works. No one suggested do we get rid of grace and favour flats, because we all know that people like the Foreign Secretary, Deputy Prime Minister, Chancellor and so on have to do entertaining. So if someone's acted within the rules and been transparent and paid their tax, I think that's where the Daily Telegraph really starts to run out of steam. And again, I make this point. We had all this over COVID. We had all this over COVID and Beergate, and that came to nothing as well.
No, it's not just the Daily Telegraph. It's in the Daily Mail. It's in the Times. A lot of them are saying that, it's the fact that now the Tories are calling for her tax affairs to be investigated, because there seems to be a lot of questions over that. And let's not forget John Prescott, Michael Gove, also with grace and favour properties, realised that it looked bad and eventually paid the council tax on them as well. Now, I'm not 100% certain whether she does or doesn't pay council tax on them. I don't think she does.
Exactly, you don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We don't think she does. So we'd like to hear whether she does or she doesn't.
I think I'd imagine, Alistair Campbell's old rule about any headline that you don't like was you get the facts out there as quickly as possible. I'd imagine her team will brief out a bit more next week, or they'll say a bit more. But given that you seem to take a very negative view of her while also saying you don't know the details, I think that's where the story begins to run out of steam. Not
really, because I said I can't be certain about the full detail of that, but we want to know. She should come out and tell us whether she pays council tax on the grace and favour property. By doing that, I'm asking her to clarify whether she is or she isn't. And if she isn't, I'd suggest that, like Prescott and also like Michael Gove, that she does that, as well, seeing as she's the housing minister.
Yeah, and I'd imagine they'd all be pretty phlegmatic about it. I mean, cabinet ministers, again, of any party, are paid well into six figures at the higher end, not all of them in government, but the higher end. So they're in a fortunate position. They've got there through hard work. But if they have $1,000 or $2,000 to pay in tax, the idea that people that senior would try and scrimp on such a small sum proportionately, it seems totally daft, because they know it would be political death to do so.
Really?
So her team said very clearly she'd paid the tax that was owed, and I would take that face value, just like I took at face value her comments about Beergate, which turned out not to exist.
Well, just like we took at face value that the freebies that she accepted were for parliamentary duties, and it turned out that it were actually for clothes, and then she had to update the input in the register. So, it's all very well you saying that and you take it at face value, but and don't even bother starting about Partygate, because that was an absolute, as you know, there were many issues with that. Well, it turned out, luckily he managed to weasel out of it. But he said there were about 6 people there. They weren't. There were over 17. He also said that it was just an impromptu gathering. It turned out there was an actual memo, so no impromptu business about it. And then, of course, the bill was unravelled, and it was realised that there must have been way more than 6 people there. And he said Angela Rayner wasn't there, and she was.
And the electorate
but she was there, though, and that's the thing. So I'm afraid I'm not going to take what they say at face value, and I'd like to see the evidence of whether she pays council tax of the grace and favour property. If she doesn't, I suggest she does.
OK, well, I'd imagine we'll hear more. But, I remember a year ago you were falling at me when you asked me if Angela Rayner was an honest person, and I said yes, unambiguously. And it turns out she is, and I continue to say she is, because there's no evidence to the contrary.
Well, there's not, it's not really about dishonesty, but if you're avoiding something because you know all the rules, a lot of people may not know all those rules. You're avoiding it, and it's just not a good look on her side, especially the way it looks like it's kind of been manoeuvred. It doesn't look great for her. I mean, would you not admit that doesn't look great as a housing minister? Initially, also to even have 3 properties that you can use, and then the fact that you're labelling one as your main residence, which then saves you a lot of money in terms of stamp duty.
Well, a lot of polling
coming off the deeds,
shows that when
well.
ministers resign, the land registry is super slow, and I'm sure you fulminated about that as well because of quote-unquote COVID backlog. But a lot of polling shows that when ministers resign, which is definitely not warranted in this case, when ministers resign, 6 months later, the public have forgotten the reason in the first place.
Well, I don't know what that's got to do with anything, what that's got to do with the price of fish. But thank you very much, Peter Edwards. A pleasure to talk to you. He's the former editor of the Labour List. And a spokesperson for Angela Rayner said the Deputy Prime Minister paid the correct duty owed on the purchase entirely properly and in line with all relevant requirements. Any suggestion otherwise is entirely without basis.